So I think you folks will find this interesting. This video actually started out as a conversation between a coworker and myself, and it wasn't until the end of the conversation that I noticed the connection between C.S. Lewis and Palahniuk. So this video is actually going to be the reverse of that conversation, kind of starting where it concluded and going through the steps that led to that conclusion. It's just interesting how well these two writers bounce off each other, the Christian and the nihilist. But anyway, let's jump into it. So first, C.S. Lewis. The passage I'm thinking of is, I believe, in the book Mere Christianity by him, which is a great book if you want to understand what Christianity is really all about. And C.S. Lewis asks the reader to imagine a society where people line up and pay for tickets to go to a theater where the curtain is drawn open and a tray is wheeled out and a hand reaches to lift up the cover on it, and there's a steaming roast turkey on the tray there. And people just applaud and cheer and just think it's absolutely amazing. So Lewis says, you'd assume that this society, in your mind, you'd think that people were starving there. If they get so excited about seeing a roast turkey, they'd pay to go see it. But then you do a bit more investigating, and you actually find quite the opposite. People in the society aren't starving, they're actually overweight and overfed. And what a bizarre circumstance that is. And of course he was using this metaphor to talk about strip clubs, about sex in our culture, where we have this obsession with sex. We're constantly paying to, you pay to see a stripper, a naked woman take her clothes off in the internet era. You'll pay $8 a beer to go watch that while she dances to Britney Spears or something horrible. You have movies where there was recently a picture going around the internet of the Avengers movie where they had all the male characters pose in the Scarlett Johansson pose, showing off their butts at the camera and how ridiculous that looked. But that's the thing, all of these movies always have to have a chick showing off her butt on the movie poster. It's just ridiculous, the level of sexualization we have. And yet at the same time, our society is absolutely obsessed with sex. We're having tons of it. There's sex everywhere, constantly. And so it's a very unhealthy obsession. But meanwhile, C.S. Lewis was bringing up this food porn as a reductio ad absurdum. Not quite that, but he was using it as an example, an extreme, silly example. Well, I can't speak to what's going on in the United States, but here in Canada, if you go into a Tim Hortons, that's our Dunkin' Donuts, they have food porn playing on the bloody televisions. Seriously, they have just these disgusting images of, they'll have a honey cruller and just this thick pouring of sugar water onto it, coating the whole thing as it rotates erotically, or the spinning about of their fruit smoothies. All this extremely erotic marketing material for their sweetest and most unhealthy things. I'm sure you have something like that in the United States. And just this looping video that's always playing. And to go with C.S. Lewis again, we have a massive obesity epidemic here. The people aren't starving, but they're just obsessed with food. They're insatiable. They're lustful. So that's C.S. Lewis. Now let's look at Chuck Palahniuk. The coworker and I, we've been listening to the audiobook of Haunted, I believe is the novel. Now there's one particular instance in Haunted that I'm going to focus on, but I'd like to rewind a bit and just discuss Palahniuk for a moment. Now I certainly don't know him personally, and I'm not trying to malign his character. Obviously I'm a fan of his. But he almost seems, it seems like the narrators of his stories, because he himself is a homosexual, that he's a self-hating homosexual. That his characters are all so broken as individuals. They're all failed Ubermenches, particularly in this book Haunted. The premise is that all of these people get together to try and lock themselves away, trying to imitate Lord Byron and Shelley. In that, if you haven't heard about it, it's kind of cool. It's where Frankenstein got written. They lock themselves up in a nice French home somewhere and wrote a bunch of stories. But these degenerate lunatics of their era. So that's what all these people in the novel are trying to do. They try and lock themselves up in this place with each other to write the great novel, to change reality. But they're all broken degenerates on the inside. One phrase that keeps being repeated throughout is the desire to become the camera behind the camera behind the camera. To try and you have the camera watching the newscaster, and you have the person controlling the camera that decides which pictures it shows, and you have the person behind that deciding what stories are going to be reported and how they're going to be reported, and so on up the chain. To try and get to this meta narrative level of reality, to try and transcend it through that. And yet each one of these characters, I've mentioned this before about the breakdown of the self when you reject the material world, when you pretend that you can create your own fantasy to live in. Each one of these characters falls into this and just becomes absolutely vile, morality-free human beings. But there's one story in particular that stood out. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. It's basically a bunch of short stories, this book, from each of these degenerates' perspectives. The story in question involves a police unit that investigates child sex crimes, and a secretary accidentally orders a couple of real dolls rather than the stuffed anatomically correct dolls that the child victims use to explain what happened to them. And the police officers become vile degenerates. But the phrase that keeps being repeated during that story is, "This is what people do. They turn people into objects and objects into people." And see, that's what's underlying this whole degenerate sexuality, and in fact, our degenerate approach to food. So let's think about food for a moment. On the one hand, you have that food porn, the greasy, sugary, fills an immediate urge, but leaves you feeling hollow and empty inside. This big obsessive production about, look at how delicious our McDonald's burger is, or our sugary treats. Now compare that to a good family dinner, a Thanksgiving dinner. Now a Thanksgiving dinner is a big production. Your mom spends all day slaving away in the kitchen, and your sister's making something at home that she brings over, and your whole family gets together, and you overconsume a little bit. It gets a little bit crazy. You gain a little bit of weight from eating a little bit too much. But the focus of the evening is on the people you're sharing it with. The food is great, but it's not just the belly you're focusing on. It's also the higher self. It's about sharing this food with people you love. While the quick, cheap, fast food porn is just an immediate satisfaction of your base urges. And sex has become the same damn thing. That girl with her ass taking up half the billboard is nothing but this objectified human being. You yourself looking at this billboard are objectified yourself. You're just meat. You're just a pulse and a bunch of hormones going to an inevitable release, as opposed to lovemaking. We don't make love in our culture. We fuck. And one last bit, because it's so strange. It's interesting how the response to this, the response to this society that only fucks and doesn't know how to make love, is to try and hammer down on the fucking aspect. But whenever they do that, it starts coming out in really weird ways. There's three big ones I'm thinking of. We start with the male dominance is evil. Male dominance is wrong. This perversion of natural sexuality, that males are the aggressive pursuers of women, and women initiate the sexual behavior with their flirting, with their push pull, run away but not fast enough that you can't catch me, sort of thing. And male as the aggressor, as the pursuer. That is Pepe Le Pew. This is how sex is supposed to work. But no, we've hammered down on that. Hammered down on that because of the date rapes and all those evil men out there. And so now we have a generation of men that are pussified, that don't arouse women. And women who, A, don't know how to arouse men by the push-pull game because they've been taught it was wrong, and B, go to the other extreme to try and get that dominance. Because they can't get the regular dose of dominance in their day-to-day lives, they go to the extreme and they go and have a gangbang orgy, or they go to a glory hole, or they do whatever. And believe me, this stuff is more common than you might think. So dominance. We're hammering down on normal sexual dominance, and it's coming out into fucked up STD spreading orgies. Then we've got this child porn witch hunt. Suddenly, finding a 16-year-old attractive makes you a pervert. Even though she's been menstruating for several years. She would have been married at 14 during any other era, and a happy mother by her mid-20s. You're a pervert for finding a 16-year-old attractive. So we have this child porn witch hunt. It's even creepy for a 30-year-old man to find a 20-year-old attractive. What's wrong with him? Almost like his genes want to find a fertile womb to put the seed in or something. So just absolute obsession to catch a predator, that creep Chris Hansen, thinking he's some sort of hero for catching these kind of dumb guys that are a little bit down on their luck or sexually frustrated. And what do we have? Child pageants. I don't know if you've ever seen one of these things, but they get these little girls, 4 years old, 6 years old, to paint. They get them all painted up like whores. They put on tight clothing, tight spandex, and they go on stage and dance. And I used to do security at a college where we had this, and of course we were right across the street from a sanitarium. Every single time we had these little girls dressed like fucking prostitutes. We'd have some crazy guy, some retard from across the street wander in, and it's just confusing. As a normal man, seeing a little girl painted up to look like a mature woman, it's very messed up to see that. And all of their mothers, these trophy wife sort of just haggard souls, all of them skinny with leathery skin and just this constant sour look of disapproval because their little girls are never dancing quite well enough. They need to get their girls to win the competition, to relive their youth vicariously through their daughters, who they're turning into little harlots. That's one example, but look at any of the youth culture nowadays. Any of the poisonous, sick, sex-infested children's entertainment that's being pushed onto children nowadays. We hammer down on the fact that men find younger women attractive, and it comes out that we have this very sick sexualization of children going on all over the place nowadays. And the third big one that I notice, violence between the sexes. Now this will probably be the most controversial one, but there is a subset of women that enjoy being beaten by their partners. Quite frankly, it's a universal trait of womanhood that women, they like a little bit of pain with their pleasure. The two biggest bonding experiences of a woman's life are losing her virginity and giving birth, both of which are painful and yet incredibly pleasurable. Women appreciate men that tease them, that know how to neg them, that know how to be masculine. They like the push-pull of just a hint of cruelty. And with some women, it goes so far that they will actively provoke their partners to try and get their partners to hit them. These women know what they're doing. They enjoy the attention. A lot of them are borderline, but it's a personal lifestyle choice. Except then what happened is some little princess that was rebelling against daddy made a stupid decision to date a bad boy biker. If you've read The Stone Angel, terrible book. Hagar from that, I believe that's her name, marries a loser, and I believe he beats her. And she came from an upper class family. So some little princess made a really stupid decision to go after the bad boy because it pissed off daddy, and she got beaten without realizing she was going to get beaten. And so all of a sudden we have domestic violence as this huge, huge crime when it almost never happens the way that you're imagining it. The guy and the wife beater home from work drunk, oh, where's my fucking dinner? No, that almost never happens. The vast majority of it is women that want it to happen to them, that enjoy the attention, enjoy the pain. And it's a weird, messed up way to live. But that's what we're hammering down on. Now even saying no to your wife, no, I'm not going to give you money to buy something you don't need. That's a form of controlling, manipulative behavior. And so what do we have? Instead of wife beating? BDSM. Needle play, flogging, bloodletting. Again, this natural urge for a bit of pain, which in some women went as far as provoking their husband to slap them, mouthing off so that they'd get slapped, has been pushed down upon, and instead we have the extremities of the BDSM community. Our diet, our love lives, all of them are just so messed up nowadays. And on top of that, we have the state coming down and cracking down, telling us how they're supposed to be. And the state is just making things worse. State's controlling our diet, telling us what's healthy based upon pseudoscience, and also telling us that pizza is a vegetable. They're telling us that normal male-female interactions, normal, healthy, male-female sex with brains involved is unhealthy, but their degenerate form of high fructose corn syrup sexuality is perfectly okay. Interesting how Palahniuk and Lewis play so well off each other. Mere Christianity and Haunted. I do recommend both books. Find someone you love, folks. Rini out.